Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our very first Operation S.A.F E webinar. S.A.F E stands for Sweeping Anti-Fraud Education. This session will walk you through common scams and provide you with tactics on how to avoid them. Your presenter today is George Shido, our Deputy Chief Information Security Officer here at F&M Bank. He was raised in Southern California and graduated from a top-tier university. George enjoys reading and drinking coffee. And that intro is purposefully vague as an example about how to begin protecting yourself from fraud. Now, to delve into today's webinar, I'd like to hand it over to George. Take it away.
Thank you for the introduction, Toby. It's great to be here this morning. First off, I'd like to say good morning to all of our attendees and welcome them to today's Operation S.A.F E webinar. This morning, as you mentioned, we will be talking briefly on this troubling topic of fraud. So the problem being really fraud is just on the rise and it's everywhere. According to the FTC, in 2023, there were 2.6 million reports of fraud. That's an increase from 2022, which was only 2.4 million. Consumers reported losing more than 10 billion to fraud. That's a 14% increase over 2022, which was 8.2 billion. Investment scams were the most common big ticket type of fraud, followed by business imposter scams. This is where consumers lost 4.6 billion last year versus 3.8 in 2022. That's an increase of a whopping 21% in investment scams. So how does all of that money get moved around? Basically, it goes down to bank transfers and cryptocurrencies. So here is a brief infographic from the FTC. And what I'd like to kind of highlight here is that the top frauds, or what they call at the FTC, the fraudulent 5, are the same as 2022. One being imposters, number 2 being online shopping, 3, prizes and sweepstakes, 4, investments, as I mentioned earlier, and 5, business and job opportunities. What I'd like to point out here is actually something very interesting for the military folks out there, is that imposters have the highest number of reports. Something for those social media people that are out there on LinkedIn and Facebook or X. You lost $1.4 billion. That's a staggering number. Okay, so how do we deal with this problem? Well, for us at F&M, the solution is empowerment through education. How does F&M help? Through education with client email blasts and webinars like this one. Operation S.A.F.E is what we do here. So Operation S.A.F E, as Toby mentioned, what does S.A.F E stand for? Sweeping Anti-Fraud Education. Some of the things that we talk about: romance scams, puppy scams, gift card scams, and IRS tax scams. It's currently tax season right now, so I recommend having a particular keen eye out for any type of tax scams in the coming months. Most fraud is a variation of 3 techniques. 1 is spoofing, 2 is phishing, 3 is malware and ransomware. We're going to discuss these a little further in the coming slides. First off, there's spoofing. So what is spoofing? Spoofing is a scam that arrives via email, text, phone call, social media message, website link that appears to be from a trusted source such as your boss, spouse, family, friend, bank, or even the government agencies. The key point here is actually that it's coming from a trusted source. That is how they're sitting there and deceiving you. The following are some examples to consider. A CEO asks his executive assistant to wire transfer a large sum of money from his personal email address. I'd like to point out what the red flag here is, and that is that it's coming from his personal email. In the next example, an elderly man receives a text from his grandson who is in jail outside of the country and needs bail to be paid in the form of gift cards. Again, what is the red flag here? So why would payment be made in the form of gift cards? You, as a person trying to protect your own information and yourself against fraud, need to be cognizant of these types of methods for payment that are unusual and out of the ordinary. Third, a small business owner receives a phone call from the IRS asking her to make a credit card payment for back taxes. I'd like to point out that a phone call from the IRS is not the normal standard protocol. Again, keep an eye out for what seems to make sense and what does not make sense. So, how can you avoid becoming a victim of spoofing? So if we look at this example to the top right, let's say you get an email. What can you do here? What is a red flag? Well, if you look at what it says at the top right, it says respond immediately with personal information. That should be the first thing for you to look out for is why is this request coming? Anything that usually requires your immediate attention or a request for personal information, it's generally not a good sign. Additionally, what else is the red flag here? Red flag is, well, who is this coming from? Well, it states that it's coming from F&M Bank. But if you hover over the link, actually it shows different email addresses from a different source. So what you would like to do as a good habit, anytime you have a question or questionable email received, hover over a link. Don't click on it. That's the first thing not to do. Always check. Another tip we'd like to give you is don't trust caller ID on your phone. Instead, hang up and call the person directly from the phone number you have on file or the phone number on the back of a card if it's a financial institution. That way you know you're actually sitting there and calling and contacting a real entity. Third, as I mentioned earlier, never click on links, especially from social media messages or text messages. So the next method we want to talk about is phishing. Phishing is a scam that arrives via email, text, phone call, social media, website link that attempts you to get your personal information revealed. And phishing may involve spoofing, which is what we just mentioned earlier, of an email address, phone number, or website URL. I'd like to kind of highlight the difference between the two. Phishing is basically a case, in both cases of both spoofing and phishing, the request is really to sit there and get you to disclose sensitive information. The real difference between a phishing and a spoofing is whether it comes from a trusted source or not. So in the case of the trusted source, we talked about a government agency perhaps, but in the phishing case, it can just be some random spam or adware that comes through to you. To kind of further on some of these examples, a job seeker receives an email from a company asking him to submit an application for a job, which requests his address, date of birth, and social security number. In another example, an individual receives a text message indicating that his phone bill has not been paid and to call a number to provide his bank account information. Third, a police chief receives a phone call from a vendor offering discounted face masks if payment is made in advance of receiving the shipment. So a common theme that you might see here is this request, this urgency, and a request for personal information. Always keep an eye out for that. To share a personal experience, last summer, I renewed my passport and went through the usual process of filling out the form, going to the post office, and submitting my application for renewal, making payment via check. At the time, the turnaround times were anywhere from 4 to 12 weeks. approximately, I actually received a text saying that it was from the US Post Office saying that my package had been delayed and that I needed to contact them so that they can ship my package. For a moment, I actually thought about clicking on the link, thinking that somehow I must have made a mistake, or somewhere in the process of filling out a form, my address was perhaps incorrect, or maybe a check did not get processed for whatever reason. So I almost clicked on that, but I paused for a moment and thought that it didn't make sense that these people were actually trying, the US Post Office of all people, were trying to contact me about a package that I was expecting via text. And I realized that I had never provided my phone number to them. And so I realized that that was actually something that was not true and actually what they call smishing, a form of phishing via text message. So my point kind of to this example is that although it may seem like it is something very targeted towards you, it can just be something that is done randomly. And coincidentally, a few months later, my wife received a similar text as well. So it just goes to show you that it isn't necessarily something that is targeted, but you need to be cognizant that these things are just coming out from everywhere. And if it sits there and actually kind of fits in a context of something that can happen, you can fall victim to fraud. So my point to all of that is just take a moment, pause, and question the validity of this request. Okay, so how do you avoid becoming a victim of phishing? Again, as I mentioned, never click on links in unsolicited emails, text messages. Never provide personal information, confidential information in response to email, call, or text. Always verify payment, purchase requests in person or via phone, and do not use the information provided by the scammer that is listed in the email or text message. Always validate the phone number or contact information that you have on file. Okay, let's talk about malware and ransomware. What is malware? Malware software that users are tricked into downloading onto their computers through clicking a link in an email, social email message, online ad that then allows scammers to access your personal files and track keystrokes. Ransomware is a form of malware in which scammers lock your computer files and demand payment for unlocking them. Here are some examples. Ransomware examples: an employee clicks on an online ad indicating she has won $1 million and unknowingly downloads ransomware to her company's server, locking all the files in the company. Well, the message here really is, if the offer sounds too good to be true, it probably isn't. So do not click anything that sounds that it is too tempting to be true. In another example, an individual opens an email attachment purported to be free music files sent by someone he does not know. Again, who are you accepting or receiving this message from? If you don't know who they are or you're not expecting contact from them, don't fall for it. And in this particular case, don't fall for anything that's offered for free. Third, an elderly woman clicks a link she receives on a social media message claiming to have something interesting to show her. Well, as the saying goes, curiosity kills the cat. Don't be curious. Just delete the message. So, some tips to avoid. becoming a victim of malware, be careful of what files you allow to download onto your computer. Of the next point, which is to keep your operating systems, your software, and your applications current and up to date. In the next tip, make sure antivirus and anti-malware solutions are set to automatically update and run on regular scans. That will protect you the most that you possibly can from being a victim of malware. So, to kind of expand further on resources that you can use, fnb.com/safe is Operation S.A.F.E headquarters. FNB Bank has 115 tips on how to be safe. I highly recommend you visit our website and to go through those tips and apply them into your personal lives. The FTC also has great information. The FBI, Department of Justice, as well as the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. These are all wonderful sources that can give you a wealth of information. As the presentation originally opened from the opening slide of the graphic that was taken from the FTC, you can sit there and actually refer to many statistics and the increasing number of fraud that is taking place there, as well as a number of cases that are taking place and reported. It's a great site and resource to take a look at.
Yeah, that was great, George. Thank you so much. I want to remind all our attendees, please, if you have a question, use the Q&A button at the bottom. We actually have some questions right now, and feel free to have them filter in. George, we have a question from an attendee. Can I block a scammer?
Can you block a scammer? I think that's a very good question. I think the context of blocking and knowing, first off, you have to know a scammer. So that would be a question I think that requires a deeper dive. If there are people that you actually do know, obviously you can block your email, you can block people on your phone. One thing as a practice that we've used has been to sit there and actually suggest to our employees, should they have received, any kind of suspicious emails or text in this case, to just remove the text and block them going forward. Hopefully that answered their question.
And we have quite a few more questions here. How do I report scammer to my bank?
Oh, okay. Well, you can call the customer service representative at FMB, and they will sit there and actually ask for information, and a file will be created.
Another attendee asks, what software do you recommend for malware?
Oh, well, I can't say I'm in a position to say or recommend particular softwares that individuals can use. I think most software, and I suggest not using free software. Generally, free software is free for a reason, and that's because it doesn't give you the kind of coverage and protection that perhaps you would want. And I can say, any of the top tier software solutions are probably comparable. So it's really a matter of preference. Some of the things that in terms of your usage, I think come into play are some have features where they provide a lot of VPN service for free, or a limited amount of VPN service, where they use a virtual private network. Another component might be, the use of like a virtual keyboard, so keyboard strokes cannot be recorded. So I think part of it really depends on what your needs are, but generally speaking, the top tier ones, work fine. And the point being, going back to one of the slides, is to keep, the virus updates going and having regular scans.
Here is a very 2024 question, very pertinent. How do I recognize AI calls saying it's my bank?
Oh, well, that one is a very that's a challenging question, and I think we're still working with that right now. Uh, from the perspective of, how can you recognize them? Uh, I think going back to the best approach would be to go back and just call back the bank from the phone numbers that are on file, i.e., on your card.
Another question, are password storages safe, such as Apple or Google?
I think they are. Of course, everything is not perfect, but certainly password safes are a good practice, especially if you have a number of passwords that you use for various types of accounts.
What other ways can a scammer infiltrate your banking information? A friend was hacked and the person changed her password and took over her account and she lost a lot of money.
Well, I think there's a number of methods to that, and certainly I can't speak to all or particular ones to the friend's victim. Unfortunately, once you're out there in the internet space and information is floating around, it's floating around. It's an unfortunate reality that we live in.
My own email address has been spoofed and I get spam appearing to come from me. How does this happen and how can I stop it?
I can't speak to the specifics of that. I can't provide solutions, for whatever email provider that may be, unfortunately. But those are not, I'll say, um, uncommon circumstances that take place. My suggestion would be for you to create a new email account. And when you do, certainly there is, at least I know in Gmail, the opportunity to use multi-factor authentication if the user is familiar with that. Use that.
Here's that. We've answered quite a few questions today, and
Yes.
thank you so much for uh, lending us your expertise on this topic and being the host of our introductory webinar of Operation Safe. Again, that's sweeping anti-fraud education. Please look for our resources online. George, thank you again so much. And thank you to all of you for spending your Saturday morning with us at F&M Bank. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your weekend. Thank you.